I've always loved the aesthetic of flail, so I decided to make my own one, but I want to make it as an accessory, so I decided to make it plushy instead of learning how to do any sort of smithing. Design wise, I wanted to go for the classic image of a flail, so a big spiky ball on a handle, but I really wanted to exaggerate the spiked ball element of it rather than the handle, so I made the ball a lot bigger than it normally would be, and I made the handle a lot smaller than it would be. Either way, it still looks like a flail because there is no other weaponry that even looks close to what a flail looks like, so I don't think it really matters that it's not overly accurate, especially as I'm already going to make it pink and fluffy. Material wise, I'll be using this fluffy kigurumi. It's just been stuffed down the side of my bed for months now, so it's really nice to be able to use it for something, and I really like it for this project in particular because I really like the contrast of making something that's a weapon out of something that's really cute and fluffy. In terms of a pattern piece, I only needed one piece for this project. Balls are really easy to sew because you only need to sew together 6 of these pointed oval shapes together, and the mass is also super easy to do because the ovals just need to be twice as tall as they are wide. Once I had my pattern piece created, I then moved on to cutting out all the pieces that I would need. For this, I just used a pen to trace everything out. I should have definitely used a fabric pen that is dissolvable by water or heat, but I didn't do that. I just used a biro for this project. I wouldn't recommend doing this as you can end up with spots where the pen shines through the fabric in the finished result. I also gave myself room between each piece that I drew because this pattern doesn't include seam allowance. I find things like this easier to sew when it's not included, as I just follow the lines of the pattern instead of guessing where the points are meant to meet at the end. I've done that before and it just didn't work out, so this is the way that works best for me. When drawing out my pieces, I was surprised by how much fabric I was using. I thought I had made the pattern piece a lot smaller than I actually ended up making it, and I do wish I'd made the ball at least a few centimeters smaller, just because it would feel more like an unusable accessory if it was a tad smaller. But instead of correcting this, I just kept going and the ball remained at the bigger size. The upside of it being bigger is that it is slightly easier to sew, and I'll have room to add more spikes, so at least that's something. As you can see by the pieces flying around everywhere as I cut these out, this was the very start of the fur explosion that I think is still in my carpet, even though I have hoovered many times since working on this piece. If you're working with fluffy fabric of any kind, there will be fluff everywhere while cutting and sewing the pieces, and sometimes even when using or wearing the final product, so I would always recommend wearing a mask while creating these pieces. I didn't for this project, and I do feel like it was a mistake because I could feel the fur in my nose after a few hours, and I'm pretty sure if you can feel it in your nose, it is not safe for your lungs, so definitely wear a mask if you're going to do this. With all those pieces cut out, I then sewed them together. Like I mentioned earlier, this step is simply lining up all my pen lines and sewing down them. It can be a little fiddly at the end of the pieces where all the pieces are meeting each other at the same 2 corners, but overall it's a pretty quick process and it doesn't need any fancy sewing to complete. You could do this just as easily by hand as a beginner to the craft. Because I sewed this by my machine, I did take the time to clean out the internal sewing mechanism afterwards, as my machine was definitely running a little slower recently, and I don't think having fleur floating around inside it was helping at all. My machine isn't that old, I got it in 2023, so it's about 3 years old now, but I use it at least every other day for at least an hour at a time, so I do think I need to get it serviced soon before it starts to really struggle. I don't know about you, but for some reason I always have all my tech die at the same time. My phone recently has stopped charging, so I had to get the charging port replaced. My sewing machine is running much slower than normal, and my laptop is very quickly dying. It's had a battery warning for over a year, but recently it's just got so bad. It takes 15 hours to charge and then only holds charge for 2 hours, and it takes 3 minutes to turn on, which is all just getting very frustrating, but replacing tech is too expensive right now. Anyways, tangent over, the ball came together really nice and quickly, so I could move on to stuffing it with polyfill. I wanted the ball to be more on the firmer side, so I put a lot more polyfill in than I normally would, but honestly I do have quite a lot of this stuff, so I don't really mind using a bigger chunk of it on this project. When I was sewing the ball, I left half a seam unstitched so that I would have a hole in which to stuff the polyfill inside, and then I simply hand sewed the rest of the seam into place once I was finished. This was the start to the lots of hand sewing I did for this project. Objects of this shape are very difficult to sew by machine because they don't fit under the pressure foot, and even if I could get them under there, I wouldn't be able to see what I was doing at that point, so it would be pointless to try. I remember when I was younger, I tried to fix one of my toys. I still have him, he's up on the shelf actually, but I tried to fix his neck because it was getting quite floppy by cutting a hole in the back of it, stuffing a pom-pom inside, and then forcing him through my grandma's sewing machine. Unsurprisingly, this instantly broke the needle, and I don't think I touched a machine again until I was in secondary school, because my school did sewing classes, we called it textiles, where they taught us how to make very simple items like tote bags. Long story short, if something doesn't fit under the pressure foot, don't sew it by the machine, you might break the machine. Next, I moved on to making all the spikes. These were really easy to make overall, but they took quite a bit of time as a result of how many I needed to make for this project. To make make the spikes, I simply cut out some circles of fabric and then divided them into 4 equal pieces. These could then be folded over and sewn into a cone shape, which could be flipped right sides out and then stuffed. It's not really obvious on camera, but this fabric does have a rather distinct difference between the two sides of it. One side has a longer, more sparse coverage of fur, while the other side is more densely packed. And for this project, I favoured the denser fur, so I always had to be sure that this side was going to be on the outside once I finished sewing. Luckily for me, the only time I messed up on this was with one of the spikes. These pieces are so small, it's a really quick and easy process to unpick them and re-sew them. It would be a lot harder to rectify a bigger piece. Say for example, I was making a hoodie with this fabric, and I sewed a front panel on the wrong size out. I would have to unpick 7 long seams in order to take it off, and then I'd have to sew all those seams back on again to get it back into place. Ordinarily for me, this would result in me cutting the seams apart, and if you start cutting seams off, the pieces get a lot smaller a lot quicker than you're expecting. Now that I had all my spikes created, I could move on to putting them onto the flail. This process was long, but I found it rather relaxing, as I could just sit and watch some YouTube without having my headphones on for once. When I sew with my machine, I have to wear headphones to hit any sort of show or video that I'm playing, and I get tension headaches as a result of this, so it was really nice to relieve my head for a few hours while sewing this. I was also reading a bit about flails while I was sewing this, and realized I didn't know much about them at all. I always assumed a flail was entirely fictitious, because, well, look at them. They just seem so completely impractical to use. Also, structure-wise, they really resemble nunchucks, which I've always been told were never used as a military weapon, so I always assumed flails were the exact same, a weapon designed for sports entertainment, but they do actually have practical origins. Flails were originally agriculture equipment used in a similar way to a scythe. Therefore, in times of need, they could be used as makeshift weaponry. Significantly, in the case of the Hussite Wars, which took place right at the end of the medieval period, this was an uprising where peasants used them in the battle. However, there is very little, if not no evidence, that ones were ever made with the express purpose of being used as a weapon. And it appears more likely that art depicting the flails in battle were romanticizations of the medieval era, an action that definitely seems quite common with the current popularity of Ren fairs. The idea of people using weapons like this in a real battle is really cool to think about. Most weapons are very dull in my opinion, but flails, while solely impractical, have a much more iconic structure to them than any sword I've ever seen. They go into the same category as hidden blades from Assassin's Creed. Realistically, they don't read as time period accurate in the slightest, but it would be really cool if they were, especially to those who view the past as uninteresting or boring. I don't fall into that category at all. I actually have a history degree, so it would be very weird if I didn't like the past, but I do like looking at fictitious elements of history because you can really follow a change in opinion throughout decades or centuries to see how different time periods interacted with what they viewed as evidence or disavowed as fairy tale. I didn't have time during this project to really go in deep onto the history of flails, but I definitely will be doing it in my own time in the future because I got really interested in it. I've never really been that interested in weapons in general, but I really do like following myths and legends throughout history, so I think this is going to be a good project for me to do in my own time. Now that the spiked ball was all made, I could move on to making the handle. To be very honest, I was getting fed up of sewing with this fluffy fabric at this point. It just gets everywhere and I didn't want to deal with it anymore. So instead I made this handle using an old bottle and some hot glue. All I did was cut off the top of the bottle so that I could have a flat top, cut out a square for the bottle end, glued that on, cut out a rectangle for the body, glued that on, stuffed the excess fabric into the hole at the top of the bottle so that everything laid nice and flat, and then finally I glued a folded over strip of fabric into the same hole so that I could attach the chain onto it in the next step. I honestly think this came out better than it would have if I had tried to sew it, because the top of the bottle slopes in quite a lot, which would make it a very difficult shape to sew, and also a very difficult shape to actually get onto the bottle once I'd finished the sewing part. So I think I would have had to sew it directly onto the bottle itself anyways, and at that point it would be the exact same process as the hot glue, but 4 times longer. So hot glue was by far the best option to go for this part of the project. The very final step of this project was attaching a chain between these pieces. I got these chains for my Umbreon cosplay, and they are really easy to pull apart and then push back together again. So when I do make this into an accessory, I can very easily remove the handle and just attach it to a zip or a keyring. With that said, this project is actually done and I can finally show you the final result. This was a very fun, very easy and very relaxing project for me. I tend to do a lot more complicated sewing things, so it's really nice to slow down and just do something that's more fun rather than practical. There's not many things I would change about this. The only thing that I think I would change is I'd stuff these spikes a little bit more because they do get squished very easily. Like, I feel like they just don't hold their shape as well as I wish they would. I think if I was going to do this again, I would needle felt the polyfill inside these to make it a lot more structural. That way when it hits against something, they won't bend like they're doing currently. I say this every single time I work with fur, but fur is a nightmare to work with. I really, really hate it, and I wish I didn't like the end result as much as I did, because then I won't be persuaded to ever use fur again. But I do think it's really cute. It goes really well with my aesthetic. It's going to look really cool as a decoration. So unfortunately, I will probably be doing more sewing with fur going forward just to get some cute plushy objects around my house. With that said, that is it for this video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a like down below. Comment what else you'd like me to do, maybe some other weapons I can make plushy. And subscribe as I post a new video every single week, and I'd love to see you again. But until then, bye!